Welcome to the Self-Publishing School podcast. This is the podcast to listen to if you're an aspiring writer or an author who wants to sell more books. On this show, you'll learn how to write and launch a book successfully, all from people just like you and from the most successful authors on the planet. I'm your host, Chandler Bolt, the founder of Self-Publishing School, the author of my new book called Published, and the CEO of selfpublishing.com. For free training on how to publish a book that sells 10,000 copies, go to selfpublishing.com/free training. Hey, Chandler Bolt here, and joining me today is Brit Barron. Brit is a speaker, teacher, course creator, and author of the book Worth It. She's passionate about helping people have honest and at times difficult conversations through her book, through her books, through her courses, through her speaking. Brit, welcome. Great to have you here.
Hi, happy to be here.
So I guess first off, why a book? Like, how did you see this fit in? Was this a passion project? Did you see this as something that kind of fit into your brand and your business? Why write a book?
Yeah, great question. I think I'm one of those people, I feel like there's a lot of us out there who have always wanted to write a book. Like, even after my book came out, I found this like thing from second grade that's like what I wanted to be when I grew up. And it literally said book writer. Like, it's just like been in my bones to want to write a book. But I feel like it wasn't until I wrote Worth It that I had anything to say. And not that I didn't have anything to say, I didn't know what to say and how to say it and why. Like, I knew I wanted to write a book at some point, but I didn't know why, I didn't know what, I didn't know when. And so when this opportunity sort of like came to fruition, it felt just like the most exciting thing ever.
Because came to fruition, that was, you had a deal come your way. That was, you just said, hey, I'm going to do this. What did that look like?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was a combination of life circumstance. So where I was heading career-wise of creating my own content, sort of relying on my own ideas in the world and wanting to share things, that sort of happened around the same time that I got connected to the publisher. And actually, they were like, hey, have you ever been interested in writing a book? We think you could write this one. And I was like, that doesn't sound like a good idea, but I have a different idea. And so it sort of forced me to like get clear about what I wanted to write, which was helpful to be sort of asked to write something that I didn't feel was me.
And so what, if you don't mind sharing, what was the idea that they were like, hey, you should write this? And why, what was the thought, what was the why behind the idea that you ended up writing?
Yeah. So what they wanted, which is not a bad idea. It just wasn't a fit for me personally. So I had just sort of had this big life experience where I spent most of my life and career in the evangelical church world, and experiencing that, and then sort of came out, expanded my idea of the world, and so left that. And their idea was sort of a guide for pastors or people of faith who sort of had expanded their views or felt like they no longer fit inside that box, which was great. It just wasn't what I was sort of going for. But knowing that there was someone interested or thought it would be a good idea for me to write a book just sort of like catapulted me into thinking like, well, what do I want to write?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. How'd you get connected with the publisher? And then how did that first deal kind of come to fruition?
Yeah, great question. So I was speaking at a conference, and there was an acquisitions person from the publisher that I did my first book with in the audience, actually scoping out another one of the speakers. And as luck would have it, I've performed to the best of my ability and caught his attention. And so after that, during the conference, he was like, hey, do you want to talk about writing? And I was like, okay. So it was very lucky. It was very providential. And I think it's an experience I'll probably never have again. I told you I'm kind of working on a second project, and those were night and day experiences. So it was kind of cool to have that and to have now something to judge it against.
I'm going to put a pin in that or a little asterisk, and I'm going to come back to that. The
Perfect.
speaking experience that landed the book deal. So looking at a lot of your content, you got a TEDx talk. It's what Beyonce taught me.
What Beyonce taught me about race. Yeah.
Yeah. What Beyonce taught me about race. You've got a lot of really good, like, anti-racism, diversity, inclusion, content. I think from the outside looking in, I would just think that would be the book that you would write versus Worth It. Right.
Yeah.
And so that was really curious for me is why not write that? But, like, it just almost seems like it's in the pocket of what you teach, what you talk about, what you do. Why not write that book? And you kind of already answered, I guess, the why write Worth It instead. But what was your thought process behind that?
Yeah, I mean, great question. That is what all signs are pointing to. If you sort of take a quick peek. And, I think you could probably relate to this as someone who has their hands in multiple cookie jars, I guess, so to speak. I've always been passionate about diversity, equity, inclusion, anti-racism. But I didn't want to be put in that box. And I didn't want everything. So I had this, it's sort of hard, like in this world of being your own creator and making a brand and a business, to hold multiple things. But I think that's something that I will fight for the rest of my time on this earth. Is I'm just a person who cares about multiple things. And I want to be able to do that. And there's benefit to that. There's also costs in that. Like, if you find a niche and you just hit it hard, like, I think that is a fabulous journey for a lot of people. But yeah, the idea of being pinned into that box early in my career wasn't something I wanted.
Oh, interesting. So what's your second book about that you're working on?
So my second book is not fully in the DEI space, but it's more social commentary, and talking about how a little bit of a critique on cancel culture or some of these bigger ideas, and more a look into, is there a way where we can relearn how to make mistakes well? Is there a way where we can understand the mistakes we've made? Does that change the way we interact with the world around us, as it's like changing rapidly, like,
yeah.
So yeah, that's what where we're going next. Yeah.
Let's have honest, difficult conversations and reflect on the mistakes that we've made.
Yes.
Not what everybody else has made. That's cool.
Listen, if you get clear on your own journey, you're going to have a lot more empathy to everyone you interact with. So, yeah.
So I want to go back to the pigeonhole thing.
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to pin you down on this. But I'm really just curious, looking back, do you wish you would have wrote that book, or do you have any plans to write that book in the future?
Looking back, no, I don't wish I would have written it. I don't know. I don't have plans to write that specific book in the future, but I think it will be a part of books that I write. Like, it'll be it'll be woven through this next book a lot.
Yeah.
I think there is there's a, like, writing the so I have a digital course on anti-racism, understanding racism 101. And that is a lot of what I want to contribute to the conversation at that time and even currently, is how do we create an on-ramp, right? So it's not the, I got my PhD in critical race theory. It's 101. If you are brand new to this conversation and you're like, what's happening on social media? I don't understand these conversations happening. How can I talk about this or understand this? That's the course for you. That's the conversation. And I don't know that I have felt the need to, expand on that yet.
It's cool.
Yeah.
It's so fast. That's why I keep asking questions about it. Not because of, but it's just so fascinating because I'm on your site, and it's like, with 10 years of experience in diversity and inclusion, I created a 65-page guide. I'm like, that's a book. And then I'm looking through your courses, and I'm like, oh man, you got a whole course like that. When I feel like when someone has done the hard work of creating a course, it's like they've created a book, right? It's just in the process of the course. So that's just it's really interesting, Yeah, it's really
It
interesting.
is.
And because I almost feel like there's two schools of thought, right? There's like, all right, there's the I don't want to be labeled as that thing. And then there's like, okay, you like double down on a specific thing and then use that thing as the springboard and then reinvent yourself. And like that's, and I don't know that either one's right. I feel like personally, my perspective has been kind of like, hey, call me whatever you want as long as you call me. Like, if I can do it, if I can get really good at book stuff, like, do I want to be doing that for the rest of my life? Maybe not, but I love books. But it's like, all right, well, that's a really specific skill that's going to get old. You know, it's like you talk about it, I've been doing for 8 years. It's like, all right, I'm answering the same questions. But it also is like, it's a window into some of the smartest, most successful people because they're creating books, right? It's just like, all right, I feel like at a certain point, I'll be able to kind of, if I want to piggyback that into something else. That's just the way I like that.
Well, I think you're completely right. And that is like, so my like day job, whatever that means. 100% my wife and I work for the company that we've started, but I do like anti-racism, these counteracting bias, these trainings for organizations. So I mean, it is hilarious that isn't what my book was about. But there is this like, I don't know if you can relate. There's the entrepreneur side of me who like everything you said, I'm just like, absolutely. Like you find a lane, you become the expert in that lane, you run with it, you go as far as you can. Like, exactly, call me whatever you want, call me like, is your money green? Like you can be my client. And then there's the like artist, creative side of me that is like, I have to be free. I need to be a free bird. And they're always just like kind of going back and forth with each other.
Well, and I think it can be creatively constrictive, right? If you feel like that's the book that you have to write, well, then all of a sudden I'm not excited to write that book. Why would I want to do that? This is the book that everyone's expecting me to write, that I've already talked about for the last how many ever years, that whatever. So this is like, there's no inspiration or pull to that thing, which I think can sometimes demotivate actually doing it.
Yeah, totally.
Really interesting. Well, hey, let's talk book number 1. So Worth It, Overcome Your Fears and Embrace the Life You Were Made For. What did you do to successfully launch this book? Get a bunch of reviews, all that good stuff.
Yeah, well, it was really fun because it came out July 2020. So it was wild because it's my first book. And so we do all of this work to like, here's the launch plan. We're doing a book tour with Lululemon because that was like a partnership I had at the time. We're going to be in like different stores all over the country. We're going to be like telling all these things. And then March 2020, you know, things shut down. We're like, it's okay because it's only 2 weeks. So by July, we'll be up and running, you know. And so we kind of went back and forth, like, and then by May, we were like, I don't think we're going to get out of this anytime soon. And so we did a full pivot, which was like fun and like scary. But we had so I have an email list, which is like, I'm sure a lot of your listeners know, like email lists are the way to go. And so weekly email. And so through my email list, I did like promoting. I wrote like kind of close to launch, I wrote a bonus chapter, gave that to anyone who wanted to be a part of my email list, then did a launch team out of the email list, gave them access to, we just did some like video chats online, some fun things, asked everyone in the launch team and on my email list to review it the week it came out. And then I pivoted the tour to like a digital podcast tour. So just everyone in with the podcast, just, you know, can I be on it? Can I talk about this thing? And sort of promoted that way, which was great. And I'm excited to see what a quarantine book launch is like. But it was, I think I'll always think fondly of that launch and that time.
What worked the best? Or what? I know it's a lot of times it's hard to track book sales and Amazon doesn't tell you all the data and all that stuff, but was there anything that you felt like moved the most books?
Yeah, good question. I think to be honest, so you already know that your your people are going to buy the book. So like,
Mhm.
you know, your launch team, your email list, the people you're in. I think what worked the best outside of that were definitely podcasts, just like getting my name and having good conversations. And then like speaking gigs. So I feel like I've been speaking a lot longer than I've been writing. And so I feel confident if I can get in front of an audience, I'll be able to,
Mm.
you know, create some friends who would want to support. And so I think those are the two biggest, just being able to
Mm.
have a conversation in front of someone, I feel like
Yep.
really move the needle beyond just the people who already like you.
Mm-hmm. Cool. I like that. And you're talking about speaking skills and how that's, you know, kind of bread and butter. This is where I'll go back to the asterisks from
Uh-huh.
earlier, or the pen we put in it. So speaking got you your first book deal.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, you know, back in the day, you were a pastor at a big church at a young
Yeah.
age, I think at 26. I've always like kind of thought, because obviously grew up in the church as well. And in two perspectives, like my brother plays in a Grammy nominated rock and roll band, and the band started in the church. And so it's like playing a concert every week. And there's so many bands that come out of churches, but then also, you know, I've always thought that like being a pastor is like the Super Bowl of public speaking, because every single week you got to come up with a new message. It's
Totally.
new. It's 45 minutes. You've got to engage an audience. You probably have no slides. And it's from scratch. And you've got 6 days to create the next one. And so it's just like the level of content creation and speaking ability and all of the things that it's just, it's I don't even know, like an incubator almost of that. So long preamble to ask about how do you feel like your time as a pastor helped you become a better writer and a better speaker?
Oh, I mean, yeah, everything you said, like, you know, I think we know this as like you watch American Idol or like some of the greats, like Whitney Houston started singing in church, like all these people, it's like, you know, that is in itself an incubator. And I think everything you said is true. By the time I started speaking at like conferences or doing keynotes for organizations, I already had my 10,000 hours plus. Like the reps that you get, I think, you know, I used to do like speaker coaching. And what's hard, I mean, there are tips and tools and things you can engage in, but the number one thing by far that will make you a better speaker is speaking. And so you got to see what works and find your cadence and find your pace. And so I think being a pastor, especially like starting young, and getting all those reps in, it just, there's few other experiences in the world that could give you that kind of time to a craft than that. And so definitely super grateful for that experience. And it absolutely made me the communicator I am today.
Do you feel like there's any crossover with writing, or do you think it's strictly speaking? Like meaning, did all that predominantly help you when you have to go give a talk? Because I mean, obviously you gave that talk, the acquisition agent is there to see someone else, sees you, says, hey, this is interesting, pitches you on a book. You say, I don't want to do that idea. And they say, all right, well, yeah, we'll do this other idea. You want to do that? I mean, obviously left a great impression. So the speaking crossover is there. Do you think there's any crossover with the writing? Like, have you seen ways that your writing's better because you spoke?
Yeah, I think so. I think if you can find the discipline to be able to generate ideas, string them together, communicate them, if you could do that through your voice, you could do that through the written word. Not tit for tat, obviously there's different sort of skills, but like one thing I do that is just helpful in the writing process is like I have like Otter, like the dictation thing, and I'll just like walk around like my neighborhood talking out loud, because it's like sometimes easier to get my brain going talking, and then I'll go back and I'll sort of fill in the blanks. So I think, different forms of communication require different disciplines, but I think if you can do one well, it's a really good start.
Nice. And because have you spoken any of parts of your book? Like, is that a process that you do, or are you mostly, hey, I want to sit down and actually write it out?
I'll speak some of them. especially if I get stuck, then I take my phone and I'll just talk to myself as I walk around. I live by the Rose Bowl here in LA, and it's like a 3-mile loop, and literally you'll see me there a lot of days just talking to myself as I walk around, just trying to like work through an idea.
Yeah. And do you have any rhyme or reason for that? Is it, all right, hey, I've got some notes or some thoughts? Is it, hey, just press record? Like, how do you do that in a way that's effective for you?
Yeah, it's my go-to if I am writing and I get stuck, which is like pretty common for me. Of like I start to really like I have an idea, and then as I'm writing it out, sometimes I'll like confuse myself, or like I'm like, does this make sense? It's not working, but I know that I could explain it to someone, and that's always my sort of like POV. If I'm walking, like I'm pretending like I'm trying to explain this to someone. And so usually the prompts for like walking and talking is like, I'm stuck. I need to think through an idea. I need to pretend like I'm explaining it and move my body as I'm doing it, sort of get the stuckness out of myself, if that makes sense.
Cool. Got it. Let's talk about forwards. So you got obviously with your first book, you got Rachel Hollis as the forward. How'd you do that? And maybe also more importantly, any tips for people? Because I feel like it's every author's dream, right? Is like, all right, I got the famous forward. This is like someone big to write the forward for my book. So yeah, how'd you do it? And any tips or recommendations for people?
Yeah. Well, I asked. Just gosh. Okay. I know, well, Rachel's a friend of mine. And so that one was sort of easier in that I had a personal connection. But even in asking for the forward for my second book, was less connected to the person. And truly what's funny is, so I don't know what I'm allowed to even say. So I'm not gonna say who it is, but he's very successful, like 3 New York Times bestsellers, like, and he said no one had ever asked him to write a forward before. Cause I was like, hey, like, I really, really like this. And my agent really thinks this would be really good. I kind of like pinned it on him. I was like, and he was like, oh, sure. He's like, no one's ever asked me. So I don't know like what, and I'm like, cool. Like it was very funny to me. And so I think when you think about forwards, I think we think that people are like constantly getting bombarded, but I really don't think they are. Like I have come across a lot of sort of kind people, and especially in book world, like book celebrities are so different than regular celebrities. Like some of your favorite authors, you probably wouldn't recognize them walking down the street. You know what I mean? So like they're not these people who are being constantly bombarded for like photos and like, I think it's genuinely kind of like very a compliment to reach out and say like, hey, I'm a really big fan. Here's what I'm thinking. Like here's the book. I sent the book proposal. Like here's the content. Here's why I feel like you would fit for a forward. Like, and cool. Yeah.
So personalizing it to them, giving them some context. Did you do anything else that made it easier for this person, this mystery 3 times New York Times?
Yeah.
Did you do anything else that made it easier for them to say yes?
Yeah, I got from I don't know it off the top of my head, but from the publisher, I was like, what is the average word count that you'd be asking for? And I gave that up front because I remember it being like low.
Do you remember
and I know that was, I can't remember what it was. I can
like 1,000 words or something.
Yeah, like literally 1,000, like 1,500 words, like very chill.
Blog post, yeah.
Yeah, and so I threw that in there too because I didn't want to make it seem like, hey, can you give me 5,000 words at your earliest convenience? So I just gave like all that information of like it'd be like 1,000 words, like, and then left it super open. Like if it's too much, like no big deal. But then and then I sent, whenever I try like ask someone to, you probably do this too, like even in asking people to review my book, or even for my book proposal, I had a big section like what people are saying about Brit, where I reached out to all these people. Would you maybe you could say something like this, and then would give them a blurb that they could just like edit into their own voice if they wanted. Just a really low barrier to entry. If you're asking someone who you know is very busy to do something for you, just give them as much information as you can. Make it as easy as possible.
That's smart. And sometimes what I've seen people do and what I've done as well is just give people multiple options. Hey, here's 3 options for blurbs. You can choose one, none of them, you can blend them, but you're at least, it's one less step that the person has to take for an endorsement or review or something like that.
Exactly. Yeah.
So you're in the middle of book 2. What are the biggest lessons learned from book 2 to, so I guess you're in the middle of the writing. So there will be, I'm sure, marketing lessons on down the road, but as far as from to where you're at now, where are kind of the biggest lessons and things you're doing differently with book 2?
Well, the biggest thing I did differently from the start is I got an agent, a literary agent, which a lot of people recommended for book 1, but I was like, I don't know. I like and I would do it probably the same again. But that was fun because that's a completely different experience. So for book number 2, I actually I talked to multiple publishers, which is not something I did in book 1. One person asked me and I was like, sure, yeah, absolutely. And so book number 2 being like, oh my gosh, I'm kind of like out here, like, taking multiple phone calls, really begging them, but still,
with multiple publishers.
Yeah, like, wow, am I famous? But then you kind of realize like that's kind of a normal part of the process. And that's what sort of having an agent will help you accomplish. And so that was fun because it forced me to, so I had a far more in-depth proposal for book number 2, way more time spent in that arena. And I'll do that again for every book. And so now I'm in the middle of the writing and it's just like, you get a certain part of the writing. You're like, why did I agree to do this? But still very happy to have this be a part of my life, but currently also regretting it.
It's me or yourself?
Yeah, exactly. I don't know at this point. Yeah, it's really a toss-up.
I'll show you this. You might get a kick out of this. This is my new book published. It's and this is not a concept that's original to me, but it's kind of fun to retell it. But it's like the creative process, right? Where it starts out, this is going to be awesome. This is hard. This is terrible. I'm terrible. Hey, not bad. That was awesome. And I feel like the part where you're at, like the messy middle of writing, is kind of like that. This is terrible. I'm terrible portion.
Right there. I'm right there in the middle. My wife keeps walking by the other day. I was writing and she's like, going good? And I was like, no. And she was like, okay, I'm going upstairs. I was like, great. Yeah, it's just, unfortunately, I literally was just talking to my therapist about this. And I was like, writing isn't hard. Writing, not hard. It's everything that surrounds the writing. It's the mental gymnastics that you have to do to like quiet the voices, get yourself down, feel all those things. And she was like, do you think maybe that is just a part of the writing? And I'm like, oh God, probably. You're probably exactly right.
You're like, hold on. I came here to have less problems.
Right. That's not helpful. Looking for a quick fix.
About whether this is a part of the writing. Now maybe I hate writing.
Exactly. But I'm like, I think it is. There's if you don't go on that exactly from your book, what you just showed, if you're not on that sort of on a constant loop, basically, then I don't know that you're writing the thing that you really need to write.
Yeah. It's a creative process. Right?
Yeah. Love to hate
it. Same. I can't remember Stephen Pressfield. It was either on the podcast or he came and spoke at our conference, but he said this. I think it was him that said this quote. It was, "I don't like writing, but I like having written."
Oh, literally, yes. That's
so
exactly it. Yeah. Oh, it's the same with like, I don't like working out, but I love having gone to the gym.
Yes.
But that first 5 minutes there, I'm like, what am I doing?
Well, this has been fantastic, Brit. What
Yes.
would you say is kind of your parting piece of advice to the Brit from, a few years ago before you wrote your first book, and all the other Brits out there who, and not people from the UK, but the people named Brit, who are thinking about writing their first book? What would be kind of your parting piece of advice?
Oh, I would just say, figure out what's important to you and then take the path that allows that to be true. So I don't think there's any rule book. There's not one right way to publish. There's not one right way to write. There's not one right way to get it out there. So whatever is most important to you, if it's the content, if it's the visuals, if it's whatever is the most important, take the path that lets that be true.
Love it. Well, Brit, this has been awesome. Where can people go to buy your book, to check out more about what you're up to, whatever would be most helpful for people to go?
Yeah, so you can get my book basically anywhere books are sold. It's called Worth It. You can find me on the internet, specifically on Instagram at Brit Barron, 1 T and 2 R's, or my website, britbarron.com.
BritBarron.com. Check out the book. It's called Worth It, Overcome Your Fears and Embrace the Life You Were Made For. Or you can just find her on the internet.
Yes.
Thank
just
you,
find
Brit.
me anywhere on the World Wide Web.
Thank you, Brit. This is awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for watching or listening to this episode of the Self-Publishing School podcast. I know there's so many places that you could be spending your time. There's other podcasts that you could be listening to, YouTube channels that you could be watching. So thank you so much. It means the world. Now, I want you to do 3 things right now if you found this episode helpful. I don't know if you know this, but we've got a YouTube channel. It's a companion channel to this podcast. All the video versions of the episode are on the YouTube channel. So number 1, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Number 2, if you're listening to this podcast wherever, whether this is Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Number 2, I want you to subscribe to this podcast right now so you don't miss a future episode. And then number 3, this is probably the most important, leave a review on the podcast. All right, reviews are super important and help this podcast get discovered by other people. So number 3, leave a review on the podcast. Thank you so much. I'll see you in the next episode.